Good evening from Vietnam, Karen. Thanks a lot for spending your morning to join our Inside Sharing show and share your stories with our global audience. And on behalf of the listeners, I want to say thank you.
Good evening. I'm so pleased to join you.
Hey, Karen, since you haven't been to Vietnam yet, please accept our invitation. Okay, so the next time you travel to this part of the world, make sure you put Vietnam on the list and make sure you let me know so my wife, me, and my children will take you around town.
It's on the list, believe me.
And in our culture, it's a great honor if we can have you to do a little introduction about who you are and the work that you do. Can you do that for us?
I'd be delighted to. So I'm Karen Eber. I own a company called Eber Leadership Group where we help Fortune 500 companies build leaders, teams, and culture one story at a time. I like to say I've sat on both sides of the desk as both a consultant, but also in roles in Fortune 500, where I was a head of culture and a chief learning officer in one of the businesses in General Electric, and I was a head of leadership development at Deloitte. And so I came to storytelling from being in these roles where I was trying to convince people to say yes to things and persuade them, and found stories were really effective. And I took that approach and make it a big part of what I do now.
Wow. Hey, you have a phenomenal career, but you introduced it to us in less than 2 minutes, and that's not fair for our audiences. All right, so we're gonna dive in deeper. Is that okay with you?
I would love that.
All righty. Let's travel time. Let's figure out the young version of Karen. What did she want and think about the future? Okay. So when I was young, very small, I always wanted to become an astronaut. But life didn't give me any chance to do anything close to what I wanted, except during the when we run the program like this. I've been able to interview about 6 7 astronauts, the real astronauts. Right? So Karen, if we bring you back to when you were really young, what was your dream about the future though?
I didn't have any one dream, but I will tell you there was a job that I thought would be fascinating to do. And in some ways, I kind of do it now. Um, there were these reporters or journalists that would do a day in the life story. So they would follow someone for a day and they would film it and they would tell you what their job was like. And I always thought it would be really interesting to, I don't know, follow someone that works at the crayon factory and see what they do and see what that's like. Or for people that love hockey or ice skating, follow the Zamboni driver for a day in the life. And so the day is perfect because it's just long enough to understand the job and what you have to do, but it's not so long it gets boring.
Ah,
And I always thought it would be really fun to do that, to be able to get this day in the life. And then very similar to what you're doing with this, I've had the chance to talk to so many different people, and I've realized I am doing that to some degree. You get a good understanding of what someone's professional life is like or personal life and what their challenges are, and it's such an honor to hear those stories.
out of curiosity, Karen, you were so young back then, right? So you can dream of anything. You can dream one day become a celebrity or a singer or whatever it is. So why having that kind of dream and that been carried on to what you are doing to today?
Well, I grew up before social media, so the goal of being a YouTube star or a influencer or a singer wasn't there because it didn't really happen. And I still think that that wouldn't be my dream because that's not who I am. But I was always very curious. I was that child that was always asking why, wanting to understand, and paid a lot of attention to people and what motivated them. And so it's always that, I think, has been the ingredient for what I do.
Wow. And then from that dream evolving to how did you take through the university time toward, the professional life? Can you share with us a little bit more on that?
I went to university and studied psychology because I thought that that was the broadest platform or foundation for anything that you could do.
Mm.
And as I did that, I realized that there was this whole branch of it that focused on how you apply psychology towards work. So it could be considered organizational development or talent management. I mean, so many people call it different things, but I found I wanted to focus there of how do I take these ideas and help people be their best version of themselves at work. And so I went to graduate school and got a degree in instructional design for how are we helping adults learn and how are you presenting information to help people be successful. Ended up in Fortune 500 companies where I was developing learning and getting into these roles of leadership development, and then ultimately coaching CEOs and their teams and helping them unpack conflict and applying all of those principles of how do we look at what motivates human behavior and the neuroscience behind trust and where we get stuck and where we have problems, and help people work through that in a way that's practical and meaningful. And so it's continued to evolve, and storytelling's just been sprinkled throughout.
Wow. Karen, and you've been working for Fortune 500 companies from graduate right after graduating, right? And then you work all the way up to the executive leadership role also. Uh, if you can summarize that journey, what makes the journey meaningful and fast track in your career? Tell us the secret behind it, though.
I think part of it was the view and perspective that I have, because it's always looking at so I like to say I'm a little bit of a corporate anthropologist, meaning I'm looking at what's happening, the process, the symptoms, the systems, the people, their actions, and trying to see where there are patterns that I'm seeing. Because when I start to see something 3 times, I know there's something to pay attention to. And so when you have that perspective and you start to notice these patterns, you see problems to solve or opportunities to lean into. And because so much of what I do is helping people be better, when you do that helps you move forward along in your career. So curiosity and empathy are probably the 2 ingredients that have helped me the most in making that progression, because I feel like with both of those, you help people feel seen really quickly. And when someone feels seen, that makes all the difference in their experience. They feel valued and they're more inclined to want to do something.
So when you in the position of having individual and organization to transform, in their ability, the cultures and everything, there's so many things that you must do, would do, and wanted to do, right? So why shape you on to be an expert in storytelling?
I didn't want to. I think I got pulled into it, is
Ah,
probably the way I would say it. I never had this vision to just go forward and show people how to tell stories. However, it's always been a part of what I did and what I do. When I was in General Electric in the head of culture role, the business I was at the head of culture for was 90,000 employees in 150 countries. And the only way you will shape culture is when each person gets the chance to think, what does this mean for me and what do I want to do?
mm,
And there was no way to touch each person individually or to get in a room with them. And a video or an email communication wasn't going to do it. And so I started using stories. And the impact of that was really profound to me, because people that I had never met before all over the world were sending me messages and commenting and interacting. And they might not have experienced what I talked about in the story, but it let them think about what would I do if I was in that situation. Storytelling so often that people kept asking me, well, how are you doing that? And I would start to break it down. I did give a talk that's on TED.com on what's happening in your brain when you listen to stories. And when that went on TED.com, it exploded. And that pulled
yeah.
me even further into the storytelling realm, where I got a literary agent and wrote the book that's coming out. And so I think it was one of those things that I just did and didn't realize people would really want to understand, how can you break this down in a way that I can follow it and understand it, especially an auditor, an engineer, someone that feels like storytelling is a soft skill. So that curiosity and that ability to help teach people from my background worked really well here, because I recognized this is something people want to know more of. It's going to help them so much. So let's lean into it further.
Wow. I thought that you already have the desire to be an expert in storytelling, but until when you work at GE and start to transform the culture there, then the idea of using stories to make the change emerged back then. So teach us, in what context that the idea of using storytelling happened in your head when you were at GE, is as one of the tools to transform the organizations around them?
So do you want to talk about the science of it or when I decided to use it more?
Yes, because I believe that each of us we have the moment of thinking, and that something just happened as like in your situation, you put a lot of thinking on how to help the organization of 90,000 people in 150 countries to change the culture, right? And the idea of using stories emerged from there. So back then, there must be many, many different ideas on the table. Why storytelling?
It was actually easy then because I knew how to use storytelling, but when I saw the response to it from employees, I was able to look at the culture strategy that I had laid out and the things that I wanted to work on, which was strengthening trust and really empowering that people leader level. And so when you have desired outcomes, you can then look at what is it that I want the audience to do here? What do I want employees to do differently? Where are they at today? What might be an obstacle? And start to come up with different stories that focus on specific pieces. That's the easy part because when you know what you're trying to achieve, you are then logically mapping stories against those pieces to help people understand. It's no different than content marketing that people do today, except instead of search engine optimization, it is employee motivation and behavior.
Wow. And as I said earlier, also, I watch your TED Talk numerous times. I really enjoy it. I enjoy the way that you present on the stage, and we share that with our colleagues, or clients also. I wanna, before we move into forward to the next part of the conversation, allow me to say congratulations on the book. We're gonna examine the book, the journey that you write the book, the purpose behind, the motivations for you to write the book. But before we get there, there's one other thing that I want to congratulate you. All right, and then I want to examine that, decision together here also, which is the decision for you to start your own company. All right. I interviewed so many executives around the world, and two things that I see commonly they share with me. They always wanted to start their companies when they were younger. When they've been successful leading organization, big ones, and then they believe that they can start, do something well with their own organization. Okay, and I always encourage them. It's never late to do something, for them. So, what made you to decide to leave big organization with all the comfort zone and comfortabilities in that realm and then starting your own company?
I wasn't that person that had this dream of always opening my own company. So I am definitely different there. When I was in General Electric at that time, the company was starting their changes where they're at now, where today they're splitting into separate businesses. And so I recognized that the path ahead was going to bring many changes and the opportunities were going to shift, and I could either stay or I could see if it was a moment to explore something else. And I felt like at that point I wanted to help multiple companies be
Oh,
able to build leaders, teams, and culture that were going to help them drive business results, create an engaged workforce, and delight customers. And I found that there's such a huge opportunity here. And of course, storytelling is a piece of it. And so the interest was really, how do I take this 20-year corporate experience and break it down in a way that I can be helping many different companies unpack these challenges and get to a different result?
and although you had a lot of thinking back then on that process, but I'm sure that there's a lot of challenges inside of you until you reach that decision also, wasn't it?
Uh, it's always interesting to talk to people when they start their companies because I think what you picture it to be before you do it, and maybe even the first month or two, is never what it ends up being. And so I think the biggest challenge was recognizing it was going to shift every quarter, even though I was really clear with who are the clients that I want to work with and what are the services I want to offer. It still shifts, both in terms of what you are putting out, how you're sharing information and attracting clients, and the work that you do. And so once I accepted, there's no place that you're done, this is your company and this is exactly what you do, but there's going to be this evolution, then it got a lot better, because I started in 2019 and my talk went on TED.com in 2021. That created a profound shift in my business, because there was a lot more interest in storytelling from both advising leaders and coaching them, but also doing workshops with different companies that wanted to integrate this skill and make people better storytellers. And so I needed to pivot towards that shift to support that.
Wow. So go to the book. What took you so long to bring that piece of expertise to the world?
I think they come, I think books come out when they're meant to. I never felt like I was sitting on it quiet. If anything, I probably felt like there's so many storytelling books out there. What would I do that's different? And when my talk went on TED.com and I started meeting with literary agents, I did realize I did have something different to offer to continue the conversation on storytelling. And the book goes deeper into what's happening in the brain much more than what's in my TED Talk, but not in a scary science way, but I break down the science in a very logical way where you hear it and you're like, oh, that makes sense. But more importantly, what you then do with that, because there's a lot of things out there that talk about some of the things that happen in the brain, like neural coupling, where you're, as the audience member, your brain activity will mirror the storytellers. That's really interesting, but what do you do with that when you're telling a story? And so what I'm trying to do here is break down some of these things to help people recognize what can you actually do in your stories to make the brain be the most engaged and immersed in your story and get the outcome that you want. And so it's been fun to not just think about my take on storytelling, but think about how am I trying to evolve this conversation and move the whole space forward.
Wow. And who would be the target audience for your book, though?
There's two. It is for people that are brand new to storytelling. This will take you through the process of understanding how to find ideas for stories, tailor them to an audience, all the way through how you tell them and use your body when you're telling them, even how to avoid manipulating with your story or navigate vulnerability. But if you're an experienced storyteller, there are things in here that's going to validate what you're doing and give you ways to deepen that experience too. And so there really is something for everyone to get and think about your own approach in it. It's not limited to one industry. I get that question a lot of like, but what about sales? What about engineering? The way this approach is designed is intentionally meant to help anyone anytime they're telling a story. So I'm not force-fitting a model or a one-size-fits-all approach. I give you the ingredients and I show you different ways that you can put them together to make sure you're getting the outcome you want for your story each time. And then one of my favorite things, at the end of each chapter, I have these interview vignettes with different storytellers. These are mini interviews with the host of TED Radio Hour or a co-founder of Sundance or the Moth podcast and stages, or a former creative director at Pixar, a neuroscientist, a physician, like people that are telling stories in very different professions. And you get a little bit of what their experience is and how they approach it, because it's something that there's so many different ways to do it, and I wanted to amplify that.
Beautiful, beautiful. So that makes the book, science plus, stories and practices also. Science, practice, and stories, so everybody can find something common in between for them to do, right?
The goal is to make it accessible. It's meant to be this resource that you can pull up at any time and underline and fold down pages, or if you do that in audiobooks, highlight. to make this be a tool that you can leverage whenever you're telling a story. And it's a light, fun read. It's not a heavy science book. It's an easy to read, fun thing that hopefully makes you say, oh, that's really interesting, or oh, that makes sense.
Karen, I'm a big fan of storytelling, as I said with you earlier, and then and definitely we will order the books to understand from the expert like you. For I have a question from a few of my friends. They're not good at storytelling in their definition, and they say that storytelling is not meant for them. So, from the expert's perspective, would you help them to understand that that they can grow and become good at storyteller telling?
Absolutely. That's something I hear quite often too. And I think there's a few reasons. I think sometimes we see people tell stories and they make it look so easy. Maybe it's a keynote speaker or maybe a TED speaker or someone that they just make it look easy. And what you don't see is all the preparation that went into their stories. This is a skill that can be learned. I find most often when people struggle, there's two big reasons. The first is that they aren't sure what story to tell and they're just picking any story that they've heard. And really, stories start with your audience because whenever you're telling a story, there's something that you want your listener to know, think, feel, or do. And you want to get clear on that, even if you know the story that you're going to tell. And when you get clear on that, it makes it so much easier to connect what you're saying to the person listening. The second is that it's not enough to tell a story. The way you tell one does make a difference in the experience. And so having a basic structure for the story makes it not only easier for you to tell a story that doesn't ramble, but it makes it easier for the listener to follow. And so there's specific things like this that once you see steps that break down what to do, you're going to recognize that you are a storyteller. You are probably already telling stories with family and friends, and this is no different. You can take this and apply it in different settings because we naturally do this.
Wow, thank you very much. Going to your book, I know this question is not fair for you, but we need to pick your brain on this conversation. So, if there is one chapter in the book that you really like to share with us in advance now, all right? So, what would that chapter be? What is that about? Can you share?
That's such a hard question because when I read it, there's a point in the book right around chapter 5 where chapter 5, 6, 7, 8, I keep thinking, this one's my favorite, this one's my favorite, this one's my favorite. Probably what would be helpful is to talk about the structure, and that might be more meaningful. The first part of the book touches on the science of what's happening and some really neat new research that helps you think about storytelling differently. I talk about what I call the 5 factory settings of the brain, which is what your brain is naturally doing when you're listening to information and how you leverage that. And that's all done in a fun way. That's not heavy science research. But then from there, it goes into the basics of storytelling, how you find ideas for stories, how you get really clear on your audience, how you structure them. And then the second half of the book is all about how are you making the stories vivid? How are you engaging the brain? How are you sequencing the stories to be the most interesting or surprising? How do you avoid mistakes with stories? What are common mistakes people make? How do you make sure your story doesn't manipulate? How do you tell stories with data? And then the storytelling and vulnerability. So there's something in each one that I really love, but I like that it can take you through the whole approach from thinking of an idea all the way through even how am I using my body to tell a story and have that be a part of the experience.
Can I ask about the ideation stage? Because I think one of the really hard thing for people is to come up with the ideas. Otherwise, they keep circulating ideas from somebody else, or So, if we want to come up with an ideas before we start to tell our stories about that, what would be baby steps that you can share with us so that we can get into that ideation stage?
Yes. Can I do an example with you?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, wonderful. I'm going to ask you 2 questions. The first question is, tell me about your childhood.
I have a very beautiful childhood, yes, with a lot of loves and cares, and grow up in a village nearby the big city, so not very crowded, but very peaceful. I love it. Yes, and
Yes,
thanks for asking.
wonderful. Yes, thank you. The second question is, tell me about a sound or smell that reminds you of home.
The food that my mom cooks. Yep. So
Is there any specific dish that makes you think of her or home?
I think there's certain foods that I prefer to eat from what she cooks for me, at home. So
Mm,
and then my wife tried to learn, but you never get the same taste, And I told my wife all the
don't tell her
time.
that.
No, I always joke to my wife, so it's something for us to remember when mom's no longer here. So the one dish that I really like is the way that she make the veggie. I really like it. Yes,
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. So
thanks for
I love
asking.
to use that example because if I ask you, tell me about your childhood, most people respond just as you did. They respond in like where they lived, what type of city or what type of home they had. They might describe relatives they've lived with. But the question is so broad, it's hard to know what to share.
Mm.
But when I ask you sound or smell, you immediately went to your mom's cooking, and then you can mention dishes, and you probably could tell me 10 stories about different meals your mom cooked or how what you shared as a family. And so story ideas come from constraint. When you're having a hard time coming up with where can I find ideas, how do I get started with this, you want to put constraints in place, like instead of tell me about your childhood, tell me about a sound or smell that reminds you of home. It makes it that much easier for your brain to say, oh, okay, well, here's 10 different ideas with that. When people are struggling to come up with ideas, it's because it's too broad, too blank a canvas, and you want to think about your professional experiences and maybe
Mm.
positive moments or frustrating moments. If you want to share personal experiences, there's so many adventures or mistakes or things that we have had that are interesting there. Perhaps you love visiting museums or traveling to different places and you have stories from those adventures. When you start to break it down and put constraints in place, you realize there's endless ideas. So the first time you start to build this list, it's a little slow, but as you start to generate ideas, more and more come. And once you get that habit going, you'll move through the world and notice something and immediately think like, oh, that's a really good idea for a story. Let me write that down.
Beautiful, beautiful. Karen, speaking of constraint, I think your line of work, you work with a lot of business leaders who are extremely busy, ambitious, have a lot of goals in their head that they need to accomplish, have a lot of people to responsible for, a culture, vision, and stuff like that. So they have a lot of constraints already, and then meeting people as an outsider to consult for them, and then if we put more constraint to the conversation in order for us to come up with ideas how we're going to tell the stories to them, what is an effective way for us people that have to deal a lot with senior leaders?
There's not I do this question a lot of, it almost feels like if we're working with senior leaders or we're communicating with senior leaders or organizations, that we have to change our stories or we have to change our communication. And you really don't, because
Oh,
it's the vulnerability in the story. And the vulnerability doesn't mean that you're sharing something private or very personal. Each person decides what they want to share, but every story is personal, meaning there's a reason why you are telling it from your perspective. So in my TED talk, I tell two stories that have nothing to do with me. They're
oh,
about other people. They're personal because I'm telling it from my perspective and it's clear why I am telling it. And so the same thing happens here. You people will respond to the vulnerability in your story, but it's your perspective and why you're doing it. There's not a need to change it because it's a senior leader. It's the human element that people respond to.
wow, wow. Let's travel time one more time before we travel to different period in time, okay? So if you are now traveling all the way back to meet your younger version with the dream of going, with people into different, like workplace and finding how they work and recording things like that, right? What would you tell your younger version about work and life and then dreams about the future though?
I wish she would listen. She probably wouldn't listen. What I would tell her though is to close doors softly. I think like many people, I've been in situations that they served me for the time I was in them, and then it was time to move to the next thing, and I stayed just a little too long. And it would have been better to close that door gracefully and move on just a little earlier than I did in those situations. I think like many people, you keep thinking like something's going to change or I can make this work, and then you get past that and you realize, oh no, I should have left a while ago. So that's probably the advice I would give her, but she probably wouldn't listen.
Well, thanks for sharing that message. That would be the same message that I would tell to myself also. So we hold on something for so long, and then one day when we look back at that, and we say, okay, probably we should close that door a lot earlier, so that we can hold good memories and good experience about everything. Your book is coming in October the 3rd, right? Is there a message
Yes.
you want to talk to our audience? So, would you say it to them now?
Well, I am super excited to get this to people's hands. I really feel like this is a tool that can help people in their personal and professional lives. It's available for pre-orders today. And if you pre-order the book, you can get a email-based video course, Jumpstart Your Storytelling, for free that takes you through the introduction to storytelling. It's 4 parts with videos from me and different activities to help you start your story. So it's a great way to get your start on storytelling now and then deepen that when the book comes in a couple months.
I think I got the link to the pre-order also, so I will incorporate into this video also. Karen, I have 2 last questions, all right, before we conclude this beautiful conversation. The first is to travel time, but not to the past, now to the future. Okay, it's fair for us to know the past, the present, and the future also. Is there anything that you are working on that is super exciting you want to share with me and the audience so that we can celebrate with you in advance?
It is really the book. When I look forward, what I hope to hear are the favorite messages that I get today when I work with a group that is skeptical, like engineers that feel like storytelling is not an important skill, or someone that has always wanted to do this and felt like they weren't good at it. I love when I get these messages where they connect with the process and they realize they can do this and they have that shift. And so that's what future me is looking forward to seeing.
Beautiful, beautiful. The last question is about our project that my wife and I are doing. So we believe in changing the world by helping people to think better. Like you're helping people to change, to tell their stories better, right? And my wife and I, we believe that our ability to think these days is decreasing, it's not increasing at all. So every chance that we be able to talk to amazing people like you, we ask this question: how have you been growing your thinking over the years?
It is diminishing, isn't it? I feel like the more social media we have, the more we almost use that to numb and not think. And I notice when I do that too, and that's not helpful. The moments where I feel like I have the greatest thinking are when I get to have conversations like this and I get to meet different people and hear about their experiences, or I listen to a podcast. I love to listen when I'm walking in the woods and I come back with all of these ideas and things that I want to pay attention to and learn about. And so the positive is you get all this thinking. The negative is you have to make sure you're listening to different voices and getting exposure so you're getting a broad perspective. But that's the plus side, I guess, of the social media age that we're in today. Podcasts are almost the listening to the radio the way that was in, however many years ago. And so there's such a wealth of insight and information and perspective that can be gained from that.
I totally agree with you, and thanks for sharing your secret of growing thinking. Karen, it's such a lovely conversation. It's a wonderful opportunity for me to knowing you, and I hope that we're not gonna just meet via Microsoft Teams like this. We're gonna meet you in person one day, either in your country or if you and your family travel to Vietnam, then we are here. We're gonna be so excited to take you guys around town. Okay.
Thank you so much for such a lovely conversation and for the offer. I look forward to meeting you in person.
Yeah, Karen, have a beautiful day there.
Thank you, you too.